To create these flowers, we have these kind of 7 different actions, and then within those, some key takeaways that will help us cover SVG and D3. So the first is to just draw a flower petal onto the screen, and for that we'll use SVG paths. And so for that one, we'll be able to learn about the SVG coordinate system and SVG paths, and in particular the D or define attribute on SVG paths. Then we're going to use D3 to select that existing petal and bind the movie data. And for that, we'll be able to learn about D3 selections, data binding, and setting attributes and CSS styles. Then we'll create a petal for each movie. And when we do that, we'll learn about D3's enter append pattern, and we'll also learn a little bit more SVG. We'll learn about SVG transforms, and in particular the translate command. And once we have a petal drawn for each movie, what we're going to do is then we're going to render it based on all of the data. So we'll use D3 scales to translate our data to what we need to draw onto the screen. And so we'll use D3 min, max, extent, D3 scales, and also SVG, the scale function for SVG transforms. Once we have all of the data mapped to our individual petals, we'll learn about nesting with D3 selections to turn each of those petals into flowers of their own. And we'll also use SVG rotate or transforms rotate to do that. And then towards the end, we will learn about how D3 does their update and exit pattern. And what this is if you've ever seen, or oftentimes what you'll probably have is, data sets that change. So, you have one state of data and then maybe something happens. Maybe this is like a real time updating data set. And so you'll have a next state that you're trying to go to. And in that, when that happens, with D3, there's something called the enter update exit pattern. And that's how you update the DOM, the browser DOM, to render, to update it from what was rendered for that first data state to the next data state. And that's when we'll also learn about D3 transitions. And that's kind of D3's version of animations, or not version, but it's D3's implementation of kind of animations. So we'll animate from that first data state to the next data state. And finally, we're going to learn a little bit about D3's many variety of ways to kind of lay out the data. So we'll have like a very brief overview of D3 shapes and hierarchies, and then we'll use the D3 force layout to position our film flowers by the genres. So this will hopefully be like a good kind of high-level overview of the D3 library, so that by the end, you'll feel pretty comfortable digging around in different parts. And most importantly, there's a lot of examples in the D3 community. So you'll hopefully feel very comfortable digging into each of these examples, reading the code, and understanding exactly what is going on. And so a little bit of resources and kind of data visualization ecosystem. So here is the D3 API reference. As I mentioned earlier, so these are all the different modules that you're seeing on the screen right now. And then if you like scroll through, it's I personally find it a little bit overwhelming, but we'll kind of cover how to go through this API together. So it just has a lot of really great functionality. But I'm just showing this to you. Don't get like, yeah, but this is kind of how the doc is structured, and I think it'll be really helpful to kind of take a look at this later to figure out what is going on. And the next really great resource is, as I mentioned earlier, with D3 ecosystem, there's a lot of examples that have been built, a lot of like little bite-sized examples that have been built. And when D3 first started in 2011, a lot of these examples were hosted on this website called blocks, bl.ox.org. And you can see these are some of the popular ones. And I think there's something like 40 or 50,000 of these examples. So if you want to take a look, it used to look something like this, where you'll have kind of a preview of the code, and oh gosh, so you'll have a preview of the code, and then here you'll have the index HTML. And so this is basically where, so basically this is what's being rendered up here in the preview. So this is how we used to kind of like look at D3 examples for a good number of years. So this is the D3 code. And then we would kind of like look at this and play around with it to figure out what's going on. And then I think 2 years ago or so, Observable was launched, and it's become, let me see if I can give you the home view then. Let me show you the home view. So yeah, so Observable is, I tend to describe it as well, they describe themselves, I think, as a magic notebook for data and visualization, I think is how they describe themselves. Explore and visualize data, discover and be inspired. Yeah, so this is kind of a lot of where the D3 examples are hosted now. If you look at the docs, and for kind of a lot of the D3 functions, if you see an examples link right next to that function, it will usually lead to an observable notebook. And I think of observable notebooks a little bit like if Jupyter notebooks were on the web and built for like, instead of writing in Python, you write in JavaScript, and built for visualization. So that's what we're using today. And another note I should mention about Observable is that I think the key difference is that whereas my understanding of other notebooks is that each cell is evaluated in a like top-down order, like so whatever cell comes first is evaluated first. Observable notebook is I believe evaluated, I think they call it reactively. So there's a dependency chain of cells, and whatever is at the top root of that dependency chain is evaluated first and then going down. So that's why you might actually, I've gotten questions where people were a little bit confused about where the like requires were or the imports were. So I have a lot of those down here. And that's just because these kind of like the cells can be in any order that I want. So I like to just order my notebook with all of the information up top and kind of all of the utility functions at the bottom. So if you ever get lost in any of these notebooks and you're wondering, you know, where something is happening, oftentimes it might be at the bottom. So I just wanted to give that note. And for Observable, I wanted to give a small disclaimer that as of right now, for like the next few months, I have a partnership with Observable to like create a certain number of notebooks. But I also want to say that I've been using Observable for like the last 2.5 years, and I have created this workshop with Observable anyways. So just a small disclaimer, but also that I would have just used it anyways. And the last two are more kind of like community resources. So there is a D3 Slack, and where you can kind of ask questions about D3. And then there is a wider data visualization society, and they aren't D3 specific, but I think there's a lot of people knowledgeable of D3 in their Slack also. So I think both would be great resources for if you're really stuck on D3 and you want some help. I think those places would be great places to ask. So yeah.